Hello and welcome to the first season of the Journalism Salute. I'm Mark Simon, based in the Lehigh Valley part of Pennsylvania. I'm a 1997 graduate of the College of New Jersey with a journalism degree who has worked in sports media for 25 years. For the last 3 months, I have been sending daily journalism salutes on social media, pairing them with donations to a wide range of journalistic organizations. My intent was to counter cries of fake news, lamestream media, and enemy of the people, by doing a little of whatever I could each day to help. The next phase of this project is to learn more about the groups that I've been saluting. That's where these interviews come in. Who are these groups? What do they do? What do they do best? And why are they so important to our present and our future? We'll talk to people from a diverse set of organizations to try to learn more. Thank you for joining me. On this episode, we're joined by Eve Pearlman. Eve is the co-founder and CEO of Spaceship Media. I'll let her explain who they are and what they do. Eve is a longtime journalist who has been an editor and writer for the Patch family of websites, worked internationally in London, and was an editor for an education news source in California. I highly recommend watching her TED Talk. I got steered to this company by listening to a podcast interview with Jeff Jarvis, another journalist. First thing that I would ask, I'm fascinated by the origin of the organization, starting with the name. Why is it named Spaceship Media?
Hey, Marco. Well, thank you for having me on. It's a delight. And thank you for that nice intro. You are not the first person to ask about the name. We came up with it by a whole lot of back and forth, thinking about what would be notable, what would be memorable, what would be, I don't know, for lack of a better term, invite curiosity and wonder. And we settled on it because it invites going somewhere new, right? Invites exploration, which is a lot of what we do in our work. Both we invite the exploration of the journalists we partner with, and also people who are participating in our conversations, participating in our journalism. So it turns out to be a great name for what we're up to.
I have reached out to, donated to, researched more than 90 different organizations, and yours is unique in a number of ways. It is involved in the field of dialogue journalism. Explain exactly what your company does.
I will do that, and I will urge you to interrupt me or redirect me if you want, because I can go on and on and on about this. It's been a labor of love and a lot of joy. But what we do in reasonably succinct terms is we use journalism to convene conversations of people across social and political fractures. And so it starts with a reconceptualization of journalistic practice. Like how can journalists do what they've always done? Go to the heart of divides, go to points of tension, go to places where news is happening. But then when arriving there, metaphorically, how can we do something different? How can we, instead of practicing in our craft in a way that heightens divides or amplifies divides, really think about teasing forth nuance and really think about getting a wide array of voices involved, not the most practice partisan voices, but everyday people. So dialogue journalism is the name we give to the 7-step process we've developed for convening conversations of people across difference and supporting them with facts. So for example, we did a conversation about guns and gun safety. We did it in partnership with Advance, which runs a network of local news sites across the country, and some other properties. And what we did is we asked people on all sides of the debate about guns to come together in a closed, moderated Facebook group to talk about their ideas about it. And then we support those conversations with reporting, and we tell stories about those conversations and the issues and topics that arise out of it. And I mentioned that project because I'm super excited because we have a Tiller Press, which is a Simon & Schuster property, has a book coming out about that project in September.
One of the things that I got from watching your TED Talk was the sense that this was a very personal issue / subject to you, the divide, the national divide, the divides in many different areas. Is there an example of something that you've experienced that got you wanting to make these kinds of changes?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've always been driven as a journalist by service, right? By an interest in helping communities, both by giving them information, but also by helping create community and helping communities know themselves and make decisions and understand both make decisions and understand what's happening around them, right? And so that is a very personal drive. So I and Spaceship was born in 2016, and what I was seeing was these just increasing which fractures in our public spaces, and we see them now in, I don't know how to characterize where we are now from there, but it's worse, right? And so it is this personal mission to think about what can I, as a person who has these skills in listening, has these skills in information vetting, has these skills in holding community, how can I support the fabric of our democracy? How can I support the public square, right? And I think Spaceship was born from really thinking about how could I take these skills that I have in knowing people, in coming forward with empathy and telling story, and make them really a vital, critical use. And I think that's why we've been so successful, right? Because the state we're in now, which is very complicated and amplified by bad actors and all sorts, it's very complicated and difficult, but the state we're in is bad for all of us, right? It's not a good way to live, where we hate the other side, where we don't know who to trust, where we feel lost and confused and overwhelmed, a lot when we look at the news. So I think that in that sense, it's deeply personal. It's like, what can I do with the skills I have from where I sit to serve the greater good?
What was I know that you started this up with someone else originally. What was the startup process for it like?
Yeah, it was super interesting. I mean, it came really from us having this sense of what would we do if we could do anything, right? As journalists now, like what would be the best thing we could do? And we were fiddling around with a podcast for a while, and we kind of were thinking about, could we partner with incarcerated people? Like, what could we do, and what would have value? And then it really came in response to, I would say, what I already mentioned, which is like the state of national news and information and public discourse, and also kind of me thinking about how I'd always felt at odds with some of the ways that journalists are supposed to practice their craft. Like, I always knew I had bias. I always knew that every story I chose to run or not run, every person I talked to or didn't, every quote that I chose, I knew that came from somewhere. It came from my ideas of what is important, and if you look deeper, my identity, my life experience, all that stuff. And so it was in certain ways like a coming out. Like, I'm going to come out and I'm going to say to people, these are my views, but doesn't mean I can't hold you in conversation from a range of views. And it doesn't mean I carry views and ideas about the world, but it doesn't mean I can't give you carefully vetted information. And in part of our work, and if people want to dive into it, it's pretty clearly outlined on our website, is giving people reporting in a non-narrative form to really break down story and say, here's a list of facts and figures about what you need to know, versus a narrative story that has a lead that I would argue often points one way and a final quote that points usually the same way. And so it's it comes from that.
How does a project go from idea to completion? I was going through some of the different things that you've done, and I would encourage others to do that on your page. And each one of them were very impressive in the way that you were able to gather people from both sides, the discussions that came out of those, the long list of links that went with each of those to things that got done. How does the path of a story kind of, and the path of a project here come to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a long path, and it takes a lot of heart and passion and effort. But what we aim at core is always to be responsive to our community and the people we're serving. So typically we start by partnering with an existing news organization and talking about what's happening now in their community, what's relevant, what are people talking about. And then we always we invite people into a conversation, right? We say something along the lines of, are you open to or interested in a fact-based, respectful conversation with people on opposite sides of this issue? And people are, not everybody is, but a lot of people are. And then we ask a series of questions that invite people to reflect on where they stand and also what they think about the other side. And you can't see me, but I'm putting that in quotes. And then we ask people what they think of the other side. We ask people what they think the other side thinks of them. We ask them what they want to know. And we ask about the other side and vice versa. And so we want to begin to, at the beginning of these projects, we're asking people to think about their own stereotypes, think about their baggage they carry, and invite curiosity, right? Because while we tend to forget this, and what's beautiful about this work is every time we run this process, it brings a softening. People are like, oh yeah, this can't really be true. Like all people who support abortion can't this or vice versa, right? Once you start to slow down and think and remember the things we know about how we talk to people when we're talking well, it's this great softening. And then usually these projects have run on Facebook, not always, and more they're not, but we do a month-long closed, carefully moderated, carefully supported conversation in partnership with a news organization. And then we tell stories about the conversation, which we think is newsworthy, and also just about the things that arise. Like, so if people are talking about a particular issue, that becomes the backbone for story. So it's a long process, it's intensive, but it's really transformative, I think, both for journalists and also for the people who participate.
What's the value of time here? Meaning that this is a completely different experience from the roundtable that you might see on the news or that you might read about in a paper where you have kind of a both sides brought together just for a moment in time. Does time prevent situations where, well, I would imagine you have some combativeness, but that dissipates? And two, you run into situations where people might not be fully honest in a one-time setting, but over multiple months, like your group is doing, you're more likely to get more honest dialogue.
Look, anything worth doing, we know this takes a lot of time. We're a society now that wants a quick fix. We want to solve it. We want to, just have this immediacy and we want to transform. Like there's a contest going now for like a 15-minute activity that will depolarize people, and I look at that and I'm like, yeah, that sounds cool. But then in reality, people don't change like that. And so it's giving people a chance to come again, to slow down, to think about, to reflect on their own behavior, to take a breath for an hour or days. And so that time has real value of just opening space up for exploration. I mean, it's a lot of what we do is an antidote to, the really well documented problems and challenges of the way we live on social media typically, and the way we live in the news and information ecosystem now.
So the day that I watched your TED Talk, I also read an article in the New York Times about white evangelicals in Iowa and why they support Donald Trump. And it was like the connection was right there for me to what you do, that these are people that have this viewpoint that is very specific. They've had this viewpoint. It's something that's been there for them for a long period of time, and they don't necessarily have the exposure to the other side of things. I give that as just an anecdote here to look at it from a broader perspective. What are the groups that you're most proud of that you've brought together?
It's so funny, Mark, as you were talking, because I wrote down the word exposure and circled it, and then you said exposure, which amuses me. But because so many people simply don't have exposure to people who feel differently than them. You asked me about my favorite projects. I don't know that I have a favorite project, but the thing that I feel most lucky to be a part of is and this sounds very non-journalistic and kind of hokey, but the ways in which I've grown doing this work, and the ways in which people in communities that I've worked with have grown doing this work, and also the way journalists have grown during this work. It's like, I think a lot about extension of empathy and kind of pushing towards the edge of what is familiar, what I consider right, what I consider normal, and and trying to really imagine life for other people and what their ideas and values and stresses and dreams are about. And I think about that for journalists and the people we work with as well.
Are there specific projects, like you've done a guns project?
Yeah.
You brought people together in Minnesota, which I was going to get to in a second, rural and non-rural together. Can you just give an example then of just one and how it kind of all came together?
This is a pilot project that we did before we did this national conversation that brought women from California together who voted for Clinton together with women from Alabama who voted for Trump. But prior to that, we did a little pilot project that between students of color in my town. I live in a town of about 75,000 called Alameda in the San Francisco Bay Area. So students of color and cops. And we started by finding police officers who were willing to be a part of this conversation, and finding a classroom, a teacher who was willing to let us work with the students in his classroom and offer them this opportunity. And we ran the process of interviewing, and it was a little atypical in that we interviewed the police officers separately, interviewed students separately, and then had a reporter literally going back and forth, varying questions and answers between those two, what we think of as communities. And then we built, and it's on our website, an interactive. So what was nice about that project, and it was relevant then and it's relevant now, is how little sort of direct, real, genuine contact both of those two groups had with each other. And so the students asked really kind of, their questions were very revealing. So they'd say things like, is it the same police officer who stops me on the corner that goes to a shootout? What are the kind of weapons that police officers have in their car? What does a police officer think when they make a stop? A lot of questions about sort of rights and procedures. And then the officers had questions like, what have students' actual interaction with us been in the community? Or are they getting their information from video, from outside of the community? And so there was just a lot of sort of gentle softening and curiosity that our reporting fulfilled in a very sweet way. I mean, then we ended by, after we had run this process, we all got together. They had opportunity for in-person facilitated dialogue, and you can see more about that on the site. But that one was dear to me because A, it was our first effort ever, and B, because it was so humanizing so quickly. And I think when we live in such a heightened state of anger, frustration, knee-jerk reactivity on all sides, having these opportunities to slow down, to be curious, to reconnect, to fill the void of conjecture and speculation with actual reported info is very grounding and has an enduring value.
I'm going to read a quote from your page that I think goes right to that. So many times we forget to listen, and this exercise was helpful in training us to do that. Listen with our hearts and minds in an effort to better understand our neighbors. I was thinking, as you were talking about how it's helped you grow, I was thinking about the mental health of the people involved in these projects that you organize. And it reminded me of something that I read in the self-help book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, about understanding separate realities. Was there any connection between getting people together and the improved mental health of the people that were participants, even anecdotal?
Yeah, I would say anecdotally. Look, and I really believe this, like how we're living now, where we live in, I don't know you specifically, but a whole lot of people I know are living in these heightened states of, I mean, the pandemic has a whole nother layer of real stress and trauma to people. But in terms of our political and social divides, this state of anger and disdain and dismissiveness and reactivity, everything we know about how we work as human organisms lets us know that that's bad for our health, right? Stress is bad for our health. Animosity is bad for our health. Thinking the worst is bad for our health. And so it's very clear that that it feels better. I mean, we know this from our life experience. If we're having a tension with a roommate or tension with a partner or tension with a child, when we can find a way to resolve it, when we can find a way to kind of settle and know that we don't agree necessarily, like, but that that we're not vilifying one another, it feels so much better. I mean, I find it just fascinating, and again that, like, the core things we know about being human, about being a coworker, about being a parent, about being in a relationship, we somehow forget when we take to the political arena. And it's an interesting kind of twist of understanding. Like, we know what feels better, we know how to get our way in the workplace, or we know the kinds of things that will help, we know how to influence a person if we're trying to work with a child or something. But when we go into the political arena, we think we're going to be effective by being just raging assholes, or we decide that that's the only way, and it isn't.
Well, with that in mind, why are journalists ideal to fulfill the role that you're asking them to fulfill here?
I love journalists, right? To be a journalist, you have to have a whole lot of confidence and curiosity and toughness. And I don't know, it's an interesting question. I don't know if journalists are the right people, but we are the fourth estate, right? We are the guardians of the public sphere. And we, one of the things I say over and over again when I'm inviting journalists to reflect on their practices, if what we were doing were working, I don't think we would be here, right? And I'm speaking in broad generalizations, but as journalists, we don't have the trust of people. So what are we doing what do we need to do to change ourselves? Like, we know that if you're doing something and it's not working, you should change what you're doing. Probably you should think about what you're doing and change it. But again, we forget that, we have journalists doubling down on facts matter, trust me. But what we know about trust is that, relationships come before trust. I don't trust you because you say you should. In fact, I wouldn't be smart to. I trust you because, if you're like, when I was a local journalist, I showed up again and again and again. And I said, yeah, whoops, I made a mistake. Thank you. Or yes, I should report that. Or yes, that's important. Or, you build a relationship over time. And so I don't know that journalists are the right person, but what I do know is that we're in sort of a slow moving, long-term crisis around information and journalism and public square. And journalists are at the heart of that. So what to do to fix it? And journalists are adaptable too, right?
The transition from that, I normally, if this was in my normal job, I host a sports-related podcast, I would say, tell me about your players. In this case, I'm going to say, tell me about your staff, not necessarily who they are, but the traits that they have that make them good at their job.
I struggle to find people who have a really wide skill set, right? So there's who have sort of the core basic skills of journalism, which is like very serious attention to detail, good research, good writing, the utmost integrity, a real commitment to accuracy and parsing detail. And then this, what is typically just thought of as softer skills, this like wide open empathy and awareness of themselves and what kind of biases and ideas they bring to the table. And so it's a very interesting and complicated skill set, right? And more I'm diversifying. So like I have people who moderate conversations who are separate from the reporters who are reporting into conversation. Although I'm always on the lookout, and this is not a plug, for people who are really interested in the work and who see all the ways that it interconnects.
And how is your group funded?
So we have been lucky enough to be the recipient of many grants from the Democracy Fund, the News Integrity Initiative, Rita Allen Foundation, many Knight Foundation, and so that typically has gone to fund specific projects. We also do increasingly a lot of consulting, helping journalistic organizations think about what kind of work they want to do in their newsrooms and how they can take some or all of the principles of our work into specific projects. So we work with, we're working down in Alabama with the Alabama Media Group, with a group of all women talking about social and political change. And so there we do a lot of moderation support and helping them think about that conversation in relation to their reporting and that conversation in relation to their community. So it's been a mix, and it's, as anyone who's in journalism or social good work news, ongoing scramble.
And certainly during the pandemic, that poses even more challenges as far as trying. How much of a split is there for you between trying to get funding and trying to work on the editorial side?
It changes. Like, we'll have a big push and get some funding for some work, and then we'll do the work, and then there'll be another push. I am actually really thinking about, right when the pandemic hit, I framed up a pitch for a conversation around COVID, specifically, helping people make choices related to their safety. And I now have held on that, but I think coming after the election, we'll begin fundraising in earnest for really thinking about people's safety in relation to information and disinformation. So to answer your question, it's a scramble, and it's also, I feel really lucky because I am able to do work that I think makes the most sense possible. And I think that's all any of us can wish for.
Another quote, this one from Elizabeth Dunbar of Minnesota Public Radio, who worked with your group on a project. "My whole reason for becoming a journalist was to provide people with information they could use to improve their lives and make their communities better. I wasn't convinced my reporting on the environment was having any impact." That was why she turned to dialogue journalism, the work that you do. Are you going to, you kind of alluded to what you're working on for the future. Are you going to try to, I don't want to say like franchise the approach, but are you trying to encourage others to pursue this sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we definitely offer news organizations training around moderation, around, difficult conversations. We offer newsrooms training around how to do a full-scale conversation. So that, that's all there. I, being me, always want to do like the next hard thing. And so I'm super interested in misinformation and disinformation right now.
Yep.
So I'm looking forward to doing a project in partnership with ASU's News Collab, which does a whole lot of really innovative things in journalism. And they have a course on helping older adults identify news and information. And we're going to host a conversation in conjunction with them around helping people build those skills. So how do we vet what we see, and how do we make sure what we share is accurate, and how do we, all those things that are, I mess up sometimes, and this is my ecosystem. And so I'm really interested in helping people figure out how to operate more successfully in a really fractured and difficult social and interpersonal world around news. So we'll see where that takes me.
That takes me to the last portion of the interview, which I call the Pay It Forward segment. Two parts to this. One, is there a piece of advice that you would like to provide to aspiring journalists, like an overarching kind of theme?
Yeah, and this is like, it ran through my head, my answer to you, but then I think it's true, which is I have been successful when I trust my gut just against all odds. And I have floundered when I compromise it, when I don't, when I soften something for all the various reasons. So I know that is hard advice, but just really believe in yourself and trust your good instincts.
Now, I actually thought you were going to go tell the chicken bone story that I heard in one of the other things that you.
Yeah, no, that's well, now I feel like I need to tell it.
Go ahead.
This is my father's story, and he asks his mother why she's making chicken soup, and he asks, why does she break the chicken up before she puts it in the pot? And she says, I don't know, go ask your grandmother. And I'm going to get the generational parts wrong, but he goes up the generational chain. And then finally, the answer is, I break the chicken up because the pot we had was too small. So basically the idea there is like, just because it's what you were told to do, just because it's what somebody did before you, doesn't mean it's still relevant and doesn't mean it's the right thing. And I think that particularly holds true now with respect to journalism, because the world is so deeply, profoundly different than when there was one or two newspapers in your town and they came onto your porch in the morning or the afternoon and there was, just a few voices of authority, and I'm putting it in quotation marks. It's just, we are in a different way of being in relationship to knowledge and fact and reality. And so it is incumbent on us to act differently and act differently very quickly.
Seems like good advice. Is there a journalism organization that you would like to salute?
There's a couple allies in the academic world that have been, when Jeremy and I, who I co-founded Spaceship with, started doing this work, there were a bunch of people that extended their hands right away and helped a lot. And people have been doing what's called engagement journalism for a long time. And so up in Oregon, there's University of Oregon. They have a platform called Gather that brings together people who are doing engaged journalism. That's really nice. In New York, CUNY's Craig Newmark School is their social journalism school, does a lot of innovative things, and we've hired a number of their students. And then down in Arizona is ASU's News Collab, and they've been tremendously supportive as well. I would urge people who are curious to go look at those places to see what kinds of things people are experimenting with around getting people the news and information they need to live.
Eve Pearlman, thank you for taking the time to join us.
It was a super pleasure. I appreciate your questions.
I go back to the question that Eve asked at the beginning of the interview. What could we do if we could do anything? As journalists, we have a chance to make an impact and make a difference. I applaud any journalism organization that says, let's make an impact, let's make a difference, as Spaceship Media does. For more information, check out their website at spaceshipmedia.org. In particular, I recommend their About page and the 7 Steps to Dialogue Journalism. The Journalism Salute is dedicated to the memory of Dr. Robert Cole, known as Father Journalism at Trenton State College, the College of New Jersey. Dr. Cole impacted hundreds of students in his 33 years at the school. One of the most important things he taught them was to care deeply about their work. Thank you for listening to the Journalism Salute. If you're interested in following along with us, follow on Twitter at Journalism Salute, SALUT, no E. There are more episodes to come. Thank you for tuning in.